The orc woman's refusal rang through the stone hall like a hammer striking anvil. And in that single defiant word every noble in the border court froze, as if winter itself had swept through the chamber. Zara Rockridge stood before the assembled lords and ladies with her chin raised, and her green hands clenched at her sides, the ceremonial marriage contracts burning in the brazier she had just cast them into. The flames climbed higher, eating parchment and seals and treaties, turning months of careful diplomatic maneuvering into ash. Her tusks caught the firelight as she spoke again, her voice carrying to every corner of the vaulted hall. "I will not be sold like cattle to seal a bargain I had no voice in making," she said. "My answer is no." Margrave Caldwell stood beside the brazier, his face gone purple with rage, one hand still extended as if he could snatch the contracts back from the flames. He was a thick man with jowls that quivered when he shouted, and he was shouting now, spittle flying from his lips as he turned to the throne. "Your Majesty, this is an outrage. The treaty was signed by her father, sealed with the blood mark of Clan Rockridge. She has no right to refuse what has already been agreed." King Victor Pemberton sat motionless on the throne, his expression as unreadable as carved granite. He was young for a king, barely 23, crowned only 6 months earlier when fever had taken his father in the depths of winter. In those 6 months he had said little and watched much, his dark eyes moving over his court like a hawk surveying a field of mice. He wore no crown today, only a circlet of plain silver, and his clothes were well made but simple, without the excessive embroidery favored by his nobles. His hands rested on the arms of the throne, still and steady. He had been watching Zara Rockridge since she entered the hall an hour ago, flanked by Margrave Caldwell's guards as if she were a prisoner rather than a bride. She wore traditional orc marriage garments, a tunic and trousers of undyed linen embroidered with the symbols of her clan, but the clothes hung wrong on her frame, too loose in the shoulders, too tight in the hips. Someone else's garments, then, forced on her for the ceremony. Her dark hair had been braided in the human style, rather than the intricate knots favored by orc women, and her feet were bare because no one had thought to provide her with proper boots. She had walked the length of the hall with her head high despite it all, and when the priest had begun the marriage rites she had listened in silence until the moment came for her consent. Then she had simply said no, crossed to the brazier, and fed the contracts to the fire. Victor found himself fascinated by the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like a warrior facing a battlefield, even though she wore no weapon and stood alone against a room full of hostile strangers. She was not what he had expected. The reports had called her father a bandit chief, a savage who raided human settlements and burned farms. They had called her a hostage, a prize, a tool to bring her clan to heel. They had not mentioned that she would refuse. Margrave Caldwell was still talking, his voice climbing higher with each word. "She has dishonored the treaty, dishonored her clan, dishonored this court. I demand she be held accountable. The marriage must proceed." Victor finally moved. He stood, the motion deliberate and unhurried, and descended the 3 steps from the throne platform to the main floor. The hall went silent. Every eye followed him as he crossed the chamber, his boots making soft sounds against the flagstones, until he stood before Zara Rockridge. She met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were amber, bright and defiant, and up close he could see the faint scarring on her hands, the calluses of someone who knew hard work. She was tall, nearly of a height with him, and her build was athletic beneath the ill-fitting garments, her arms muscled from training or labor. Her green skin was darker than he had imagined, more the color of summer forest than spring grass, and her small tusks curved upward from her lower jaw with surprising delicacy. "Why did you refuse?" Victor asked. His voice was quiet, meant only for her, though in the silence of the hall everyone strained to hear. "Because I was given no choice," Zara said. "Because my father made this bargain while I was away from our settlement, hunting in the deep woods. I returned to find myself already promised, already sold, with no one asking what I wanted. Because I have heard what Margrave Caldwell does to his wives, and I will not be the fourth woman to disappear into his household and never be seen again." Her words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples through the assembled nobles. Victor heard the sharp intake of breath from Lady Ashford, the muttered curse from Lord Brennan. He kept his eyes on Zara's face and saw no deception there, only anger and fear held in careful check. "Your Majesty," she lies. Margrave Caldwell shouldered forward, his face still flushed. "My previous wives died of natural causes, all properly documented. This orc savage seeks to slander me to escape her obligations." "3 wives dead in 5 years, Zara said, not looking away from Victor. "The first fell downstairs. The second took ill with a wasting sickness. The third drowned in a shallow creek on a summer day. My people are not fools, king of humans. We know murder when we see the pattern of it." Victor turned his head slowly to look at Margrave Caldwell. The Margrave met his gaze with bluster and indignation, but Victor had spent 6 months learning to read his courtiers, and he saw the flicker of something else beneath the anger. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "The treaty your father signed," Victor said to Zara, still watching Caldwell. "What did it promise in exchange for this marriage?" "Land," Zara said. "Grazing rights to the western valleys, timber rights to the old-growth forest, and safe passage through the border passes for human merchants. In exchange, my clan would cease all raids and accept Margrave oversight of our settlements." "Margrave oversight," Victor repeated. He looked back at Zara. "Meaning you would become subjects of Margrave Caldwell rather than free clans?" "Yes." "And you would lose the autonomy your people have held for generations?" "Yes." Victor considered this. The western valleys were rich land, perfect for sheep and cattle. The old-growth forest held timber worth a fortune, ancient hardwoods prized by shipbuilders and craftsmen. The border passes controlled trade routes that brought goods from the eastern kingdoms. Margrave Caldwell stood to gain enormous wealth and power from this treaty, enough to make him the richest lord in the kingdom. And all it cost was one unwilling orc woman and the freedom of her entire clan. "Your Majesty, the treaty is legal and binding," Caldwell said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "The girl's father signed it before witnesses. We cannot allow personal feelings to override law and precedent." "You are correct," Victor said. "We cannot override law." He saw Zara's expression shift, saw disappointment and resignation settle over her features like a veil. She straightened her spine and clasped her hands before her, preparing herself for whatever judgment came next. Victor reached out and took one of her hands in his. The touch startled her. Her fingers twitched in his grasp, and her eyes widened as she looked down at their joined hands and then up at his face. He kept his expression neutral, but he let his thumb brush once across her knuckles, a deliberate gesture of reassurance. "The law states that no person within the kingdom's borders may be compelled to marry against their will," Victor said, raising his voice so it carried through the hall. "The law states that marriage requires the free consent of both parties. Lady Zara Rockridge has refused her consent. The marriage cannot proceed." "But the treaty," Caldwell began. "The treaty your father signed was made under false pretenses," Victor said, looking at Zara again. "He was told this marriage was necessary for peace. He was told it would benefit both your people and ours. He was not told the true cost, That makes the treaty void. Your Majesty, you cannot simply declare treaties void because a girl has cold feet. Caldwell's voice had gone shrill. What precedent does this set? What chaos does this invite? I can declare treaties void when they violate the fundamental laws of the kingdom, Victor said. He released Zara's hand and turned to face his court, his Margrave, his assembled nobles who had grown fat on border schemes while good people suffered. And I am declaring this one void. Now. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, some in agreement, others in outrage. Lord Brennan was demanding to know what this meant for other border treaties. Lady Ashford was arguing with Baron Feld about proper procedure. Margrave Caldwell was red-faced and furious, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Victor let them shout. He returned to Zara, who stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her amber eyes fixed on him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are free to go," he said quietly. "I will have an escort arranged to take you safely back to your clan's territory." "Why?" The word came out almost a whisper. "Because you asked for a choice," Victor said, "and I am giving you one." He turned away before she could respond, before he could see what she might say to that, and raised one hand for silence. The gesture worked, the shouting fading to murmurs, and then to stillness as his court remembered itself and its place. "Margrave Caldwell," Victor said. "You will attend me in my private chambers. We have much to discuss regarding your administration of the border provinces." "Your Majesty, I must protest. Now." The single word cut through any further argument. Caldwell's mouth snapped shut, and he gave a stiff bow, his eyes glittering with poorly concealed rage. Victor strode from the hall without looking back, trusting his guards to ensure Caldwell followed. He had seen what he needed to see in that moment when Zara spoke of murder and patterns. He had heard the truth beneath her words, and he had made his choice. Now he simply had to survive the consequences. His private chambers were in the oldest part of the palace, up a narrow staircase that discouraged casual visitors, and through a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. The rooms were modest by royal standards, just a study, a bedchamber, and a small dining room, but they were his sanctuary, the one place where he could think without the weight of courtly eyes upon him. He went to the study and stood by the window, looking out over the palace gardens and the city beyond. The capital sprawled across the hillsides, a jumble of stone and timber and tile roofs, church spires rising like fingers pointing at heaven. Beyond the city walls lay farmland and forest, and beyond that the border provinces, the contested lands where human settlements pressed against orc territories, in an uneasy peace maintained more by mutual exhaustion than any real accord. His father had tried to govern the borderlands through treaties and tributes, letting the Margraves handle the details while the crown focused on matters closer to home. It had seemed to work well enough. Tax revenues came in. Trade caravans moved freely. Raids decreased year by year. But 6 months on the throne had taught Victor to look beneath the surface of things. Tax revenues came in, yes, but they were always less than projected, always accompanied by excuses about poor harvests or difficult weather. Trade caravans moved freely because they paid exorbitant fees to the Margraves for protection. Raids decreased because orc clans were being slowly strangled by loss of territory, loss of resources, loss of the freedom to live as they had always lived. And now Margrave Caldwell had tried to make himself lord of the richest orc clan in the region through a forced marriage and a treaty built on lies. The door opened behind him. Victor did not turn. "Your Majesty," Caldwell said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "May I speak freely?" "You may." That was a catastrophic mistake. You have humiliated me before the entire court, undermined my authority in the border provinces, and thrown away the best chance for peace we have had in a generation. All for what? An orc girl's feelings. For the law, Victor said. And yes, for her choice. Her choice means nothing. She is a savage, a barbarian, the daughter of a raider and a killer. Her father is Zara Rockridge, Victor said, finally turning to face the Margrave. By all accounts, a formidable leader who has kept his clan alive and strong, despite constant encroachment on their lands. A man who, according to the reports I have been reading, only raids settlements that refuse to pay fair prices for timber and game. A man who has sent repeated requests for formal negotiations that were ignored by the Margraves responsible for border relations. Caldwell's expression shifted, calculation replacing some of the anger. You have been reading old reports. I have been reading all the reports, Victor said. From the past 5 years, ever since my father first took ill and I began preparing to rule, do you know what I found? I am certain you will tell me. I found a pattern. Victor moved to his desk and picked up a leather folder stuffed with documents. I found that tax revenues from the border provinces have been declining even as trade has increased. I found that complaints about Margrave corruption have risen steadily. I found that 3 of your wives died under suspicious circumstances, just as Lady Zara said. I found that you have been systematically seizing orc lands through dubious treaties and forced relocations, selling the resources for personal profit, and reporting only a fraction of the income to the crown. He dropped the folder on the desk with a heavy thud. I found that you are a thief and possibly a murderer, Margrave Caldwell, and I have been waiting for an opportunity to prove it. Caldwell stared at him, the color draining from his face. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire in the hearth. You cannot prove any of that, Caldwell said finally. Not yet, Victor agreed. But I will. This treaty was your mistake. You grew greedy and careless, and you brought Lady Zara to court where I could see the truth of things with my own eyes. The other lords will not support you in this. They have their own arrangements in the border provinces, their own treaties and understandings. If you move against me, you move against all of them. Then I move against all of them, Victor said. The borderlands are bleeding, Margrave Caldwell. The people who live there, human and orc alike, are being crushed by lords who see them only as resources to exploit. That ends now. You are making a mistake, Your Majesty. Caldwell drew himself up, some of his composure returning. You are young and untested. You have been king for barely half a year. You do not understand how power works in this kingdom, how things have always been done. If you push this, you will find yourself facing opposition from every corner of the realm. Then I will face it, Victor said. You are dismissed, Margrave Caldwell. Return to your estates and await further instructions. Caldwell opened his mouth as if to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. He gave a bow that was more insult than courtesy and strode from the room, his boots heavy on the floorboards. When he was gone, Victor sank into the chair behind his desk and allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. His heart was racing, his hands trembling slightly with the after-effects of confrontation. He was not naturally bold or decisive. He was a scholar by temperament, someone who preferred books to battles, careful thought to quick action. But he had made himself into something else when he took the crown, had built walls around the uncertain young man inside, and forced himself to act even when every instinct screamed at him to wait, to think, to hesitate. Today he had acted on instinct, and he was not entirely sure it had been wise. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Zara Rockridge standing before that brazier with fire reflecting in her amber eyes, saw the set of her jaw and the courage it took to refuse in front of a hostile court, and he knew he would make the same choice again. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He straightened, composing himself, and called for whoever it was to enter. His chamberlain, an elderly man named Thomas who had served the crown for 40 years, stepped inside and bowed. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. Lady Zara Rockridge requests an audience." Victor felt his pulse quicken. "Show her in." Zara entered a moment later, still wearing the ill-fitting marriage garments, and Thomas withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. She stood just inside the room, looking around with open curiosity at the books lining the walls, the maps spread across the side table, the modest furnishings. "This is not what I expected a king's chambers to look like," she said. "What did you expect? Gold? Velvet? Servants falling over themselves to anticipate your needs?" She looked at him, and there was something almost like approval in her expression. "You live simply." "I live practically," Victor said. "Would you like to sit?" She hesitated, then crossed to one of the chairs before his desk and sat, her movements careful as if she expected the furniture to betray her. He noticed she kept her back straight, not allowing herself to relax into the cushions. "You wanted to see me?" Victor prompted when she did not immediately speak. "I wanted to understand," Zara said, "what you did in the hall, why you did it. I told you, the law requires free consent for marriage." "That is the official reason," Zara said. "That is what you told the court. I want to know the real reason." Victor considered her, this orc woman who had walked into his court expecting to be forced into marriage with a monster, and who now sat in his private study demanding honesty. He found himself respecting her directness, her refusal to accept easy answers. "Because what Margrave Caldwell was doing was wrong," he said. "Because I have spent months learning how corrupt and rotten the border administration has become, and I needed a lever to begin fixing it. Because you deserved better than to be treated as a bargaining chip in someone else's scheme." "And because," Zara prompted. He smiled slightly despite himself. "You do not miss much, do you? I am my father's daughter. He taught me to listen for what people do not say as much as what they do." "Because I was moved by your courage," Victor said quietly. "Because you stood alone against a room full of people who wanted to use you, and you refused them. Because in that moment, you were the only honest thing in a court full of lies, and I found that I could not let them break you." Zara was silent for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face. "You fell first," she said, "and it was not quite a question. I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She leaned forward slightly. "I saw the way you watched me in the hall. I see the way you are looking at me now. You are drawn to me, king of humans, though you hide it well behind your stone face and careful words." Victor felt heat rise in his cheeks, a rare flush of embarrassment. "That is not relevant to—" "It is entirely relevant," Zara interrupted. "Because I need to know if you helped me out of genuine principle, or if you simply want something from me. I have had enough of men who see me as a tool to get what they want." "I want nothing from you except your safety," Victor said, meeting her gaze steadily. "What I feel is my burden to bear, not yours. You are free to leave, to return to your clan, to forget this day ever happened. I will not pursue you or make demands of you. That is my promise. What if I do not want to leave?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "Why would you stay?" Victor asked carefully. "Because you called the Margrave's treaty void, but that does not solve the underlying problem," Zara said. "My father made that bargain because our clan is struggling. We need access to better grazing lands. We need the ability to trade freely without being extorted by corrupt officials. We need peace with the human settlements so we can stop fighting over every acre of ground. The treaty would have given us those things at the cost of my freedom and our autonomy. I refuse to pay that price, but the needs remain. So you want to negotiate a better treaty. I want to help you destroy the corruption that is bleeding both our peoples dry, Zara said. You said Margrave Caldwell is not the only one. You said there are other lords with their own arrangements, their own schemes. I know the border provinces from the Orc side. I know which human lords can be trusted and which are as bad as Caldwell. I know where the bodies are buried, King Victor, both the literal and the metaphorical ones. Victor stared at her, his mind racing. What she was offering was beyond valuable. It was the key to everything he had been trying to accomplish, the insider knowledge that would let him root out the corruption without spending years gathering evidence and fighting court battles. If you help me with this, you put yourself in considerable danger, he said. The Margraves will see you as a traitor. Your own people may see you as a collaborator. You could end up with enemies on both sides. I am already in danger, Zara said flatly. Margrave Caldwell will not forgive me for burning his treaty or you for stopping the marriage. He will find ways to strike at me, at my clan. My only safety now lies in seeing him brought down completely, and the only way to do that is to work with you. There is logic in that, Victor admitted, but it is not the whole reason, is it? No. Zara smiled, a flash of tusks and genuine amusement. The whole reason is that I am curious about you, King Victor. You are not what I expected a human ruler to be. You are quiet and careful, and you hide your feelings behind walls of stone, but there is something burning beneath it all. I saw it in the hall when you took my hand. I see it now. You care about justice, about doing right even when it is difficult. That is rare in a ruler, human or orc. You give me too much credit, perhaps, or perhaps you do not give yourself enough. She stood, smoothing down the borrowed tunic. I will stay in your capital for now. I will help you build your case against the corrupt Margraves. In exchange, I want you to negotiate a real treaty with my father, one that addresses our needs fairly and preserves our autonomy. Can you agree to that? Victor rose as well, feeling the weight of the decision settling over him like a cloak. What she proposed was dangerous and complicated, and would likely make his already difficult rule even more challenging. It would mean bringing an orc woman into his inner circle, trusting her with sensitive information, working closely with her for weeks or months while they unraveled the web of corruption in the borderlands. It would also mean spending time with her, learning to know her, perhaps discovering whether this attraction he felt was merely a momentary fascination or something deeper. I agree, he said, and held out his hand. Zara took it, her grip strong and sure, and they shook on the bargain like warriors sealing a pact before battle. Then we are allies, she said. Allies, Victor agreed, and tried not to think about how much he wanted it to be something more. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and planning and careful investigation. Victor assigned Zara a suite of rooms in the palace's guest wing, well away from the main court quarters, and made it known that she was serving as a consultant on border affairs. The story was thin, but it gave her a reason to be present and to attend his private councils. Some of the older courtiers grumbled about an orc being given such access, but Victor ignored them. He had learned in his short reign that there would always be grumbling about something, and if he tried to please everyone, he would accomplish nothing. Zara proved to be everything she had promised, and more. She had a sharp mind for politics, and an encyclopedic knowledge of the border provinces, their geography, and their people. She knew which human settlements traded fairly with orc clans and which tried to cheat them. She knew which Margraves took bribes and which turned a blind eye to atrocities. She knew the locations of mass graves where orc families had been massacred for resisting relocation, and she knew the names of the men who had ordered the killings. Together, They built a case that was damning in its completeness. Margrave Caldwell was the worst of the lot, but he was far from alone. Lord Brennan had been selling orc land to logging companies and pocketing the profits. Baron Feld ran protection rackets on the trade roads, threatening merchants who refused to pay. Lady Ashford, for all her courtly grace, owned mines worked by orc laborers in conditions that amounted to slavery. The corruption went deeper than Victor had imagined, and rooting it out would require more than just his authority as king. It would require allies among the nobility, support from the common people, and ironclad evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. It would also require courage, and Victor found his in watching Zara work. She was tireless, spending hours poring over documents and maps, interviewing refugees who had fled the border provinces, writing letters to contacts in her clan and allied settlements. She slept little and ate less, driving herself with a determination that both impressed and worried him. On the 10th day of their collaboration, Victor found her still in his study well past midnight, bent over a ledger book by candlelight. He had come to retrieve a book he wanted to read before bed, but he paused in the doorway, watching her. She had changed out of the borrowed human clothes, and now wore garments sent from her clan. A tunic and trousers of soft leather dyed deep green, embroidered at the hems with geometric patterns in silver thread. Her hair was braided in the orc style, intricate knots that must have taken an hour to create. She looked more herself this way, more comfortable in her own skin. "You should rest," he said quietly. Zara looked up, blinking as if surprised to find him there. "I am almost finished with this ledger. Margrave Caldwell's accounts from 3 years ago. I think I have found where he hid the income from selling old-growth timber. It will still be there in the morning, perhaps." She rubbed her eyes, smudging ink across her cheekbone. "But I will not sleep until I finish it. I need to know I am right about the numbers." Victor crossed the room and took the ledger gently from her hands. "You are exhausted. You are making mistakes because of it. Rest now and look again tomorrow with fresh eyes." "I do not make mistakes," Zara said, but there was no heat in the protest. "Everyone makes mistakes when they are tired," Victor said. "Come, I will walk you to your rooms." She let him help her to her feet, swaying slightly with fatigue. On impulse, he offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation she took it, leaning on him more heavily than he thought she intended. They walked through the quiet palace corridors, past tapestries and portraits and the occasional drowsing guard. "Your court thinks I am your mistress," Zara said suddenly. Victor nearly stumbled. "What?" "The servants whisper about it. The nobles speculate." Why else would a king give an orc woman free access to his private study, his counsels, his time? She glanced at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Does it bother you what they say?" "It bothers me that they reduce everything to scandal and gossip," Victor said. "But no, the speculation itself does not bother me. Let them think what they like. Even though we have not touched except in the most formal ways, even though you keep yourself carefully distant and proper, even so." They reached her door. Zara turned to face him, still holding his arm, close enough that he could see the faint freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. "You are afraid of what you feel," she said softly. "Afraid that if you let yourself want me, you will become like Margrave Caldwell, seeing me as something to possess rather than a person to respect." "That is not," Victor began, then stopped, because it was true and denying it would be a lie. "Yes, I am afraid of that." "You are nothing like him," Zara said. "You have shown me nothing but respect and courtesy since the moment you took my hand in that hall. You have asked nothing of me except my help, and you have offered everything in return. Do you think I do not see that?" Do you think I do not know the difference between a man who wants to own me and a man who simply wants me? What are you saying? I am saying that I am drawn to you as well, King Victor. I am saying that when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth trusting. I am saying that if you wanted to court me properly, I would welcome it. Victor's heart hammered in his chest. Your people and mine have been enemies for generations. A courtship between us would be scandalous beyond measure. We are already scandalous, Zara pointed out. We might as well earn the reputation. Despite himself, Victor smiled. You make a compelling argument. Then what is your answer? He should say no. He should step back, maintain proper distance, focus only on the work they were doing together. Getting personally involved would complicate everything, would give ammunition to his enemies, would put Zara in even more danger than she already faced. But he was tired of should. He was tired of being careful and distant and alone. May I visit you tomorrow evening? He asked. Not to work, but simply to talk and perhaps share a meal, Zara smiled, her tusks catching the light. I would like that very much. Then I will see you tomorrow, Victor said. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, and she returned it with an orc salute, fist to heart. He walked back to his own chambers feeling lighter than he had in months, feeling as though something that had been locked tight inside him had finally begun to open. The next evening, he came to her rooms with a basket of food from the palace kitchens and a bottle of wine from his private cellar. Zara answered his knock wearing a simple dress of dark blue wool, her hair loose around her shoulders. She had cleaned her room since his last visit, pushing the work table to the side and arranging cushions on the floor before the fireplace. They sat together and ate bread and cheese and roasted chicken, washing it down with red wine that was probably worth more than most people earned in a year. They talked about small things at first, careful and polite, testing the boundaries of this new arrangement. But as the evening wore on and the wine loosened their tongues, the conversation deepened. Zara told him about growing up in Clan Rockridge, learning to hunt and fight alongside her brothers, earning her place as her father's advisor through skill and determination, rather than birth. She told him about the slow erosion of orc lands, the way her people were being pushed into smaller and smaller territories, forced to raid or starve. Victor told her about his childhood as a prince, always knowing he would one day rule but never quite feeling ready for it. He told her about his father's long illness and the burden of watching a strong man fade slowly into weakness. He told her about his fears that he was not wise enough, not strong enough, not decisive enough to be the king the kingdom needed. You are more than enough, Zara said firmly. You saw injustice and you acted to stop it. You risked political backlash to do what was right. That is exactly the kind of king your people need. I hope you are correct, Victor said, because once we move against the Margraves openly, there will be no going back. It will be war in a sense, a war fought in courts and councils rather than battlefields. Then we fight it together, Zara said. You and I, allies against corruption. And perhaps more than allies, Victor asked quietly. Perhaps, Zara agreed, and the look she gave him was warm and full of promise. They met like that several more times over the following weeks, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings after long days of investigation and planning. Victor found himself looking forward to those hours with an intensity that surprised him, found himself thinking about Zara at odd moments during the day, wondering what she would say about some decision he had to make, or how she would approach a particular problem. He was falling in love with her, he realized, and the knowledge was both exhilarating and terrifying. Zara seemed to feel the same way, if the softness in her eyes when she looked at him was any indication. She touched him more often now, casual brushes of hand against arm, her fingers trailing across his shoulders when she leaned over to look at a document he was reading. Each touch sent sparks racing along his nerves, making him hyper-aware of her presence. But they moved slowly, both of them cautious about crossing the line between friendship and something deeper, both aware that their relationship would have consequences far beyond their own feelings. The decision was taken out of their hands on a cold afternoon in early spring when Margrave Caldwell attempted a coup. Victor was in the throne room hearing petitions when the palace guards burst in, their captain shouting a warning about armed men in the East Wing. Before Victor could react, Caldwell himself appeared in the doorway with a dozen soldiers at his back, all wearing the Margrave's colors and carrying drawn swords. "Your Majesty," Caldwell said, his voice dripping false courtesy, "I am afraid I must ask you to step down from the throne. You have proven yourself unfit to rule, and the lords of the realm have asked me to assume regency until a proper succession can be arranged." It was a brazen lie. The other lords looked as shocked as Victor felt, and several were already calling for their own guards. But Caldwell had clearly planned this moment, had chosen his timing carefully. The throne room was full of courtiers but relatively few guards, and the soldiers Caldwell had brought were hardened men, mercenaries by the look of them. "This is treason," Victor said quietly, keeping his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "Stand down, Margrave Caldwell, and I will show you mercy." "Mercy?" Caldwell laughed. "You know nothing of mercy, boy. You have spent the past month plotting to destroy me, investigating my affairs, poisoning the court against me. Did you think I would not notice? Did you think I would simply allow you to strip me of my lands and titles? You stole from the crown," Victor said. "You murdered your wives. You exploited and abused the people you were sworn to protect. You forfeited any right to mercy when you broke faith with your oaths." "Bold words from a whelp with no army at his back," Caldwell said. He gestured to his soldiers. "Take him." The mercenaries moved forward, and the throne room erupted into chaos. Loyal guards rushed to defend the king, courtiers screamed and scattered, and steel rang against steel as the two forces clashed. Victor drew his own sword, a light blade meant more for ceremony than combat, and prepared to fight. He was not a warrior by training, but his tutors had taught him the basics of swordplay, and he would not go down without a struggle. Then Zara was there, bursting through a side door with a heavy wooden staff in her hands. She must have heard the commotion from wherever she had been in the palace, and she had armed herself with the first thing she could find. She laid about her with ferocious skill, the staff cracking against helmets and knees and ribs, dropping mercenaries left and right. "To the king!" she shouted, and her voice rallied the scattered guards, gave them a focal point to defend. The fight was brutal and short. Caldwell's mercenaries were skilled, but they were outnumbered and taken off balance by Zara's unexpected intervention. Within minutes it was over, the mercenaries disarmed and kneeling under guard. Caldwell himself held between two burly soldiers with his arms twisted behind his back. Victor stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, his sword still clutched in his hand. Blood spattered the marble floor, though he was not sure whose. The throne room stank of sweat and fear and violence. "Are you hurt?" Zara appeared at his side, the staff still gripped tight, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "No, thanks to you." Victor realized he was shaking and forced himself to stop, to breathe slowly and deeply until the adrenaline faded. "That was foolish. You could have been killed." "So could you," Zara said. "I was not about to let that happen." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, some final barrier crumbling away. She had risked her life to save him. She had fought at his side without hesitation, without question, because she cared for him and would not see him harmed, and he realized that he felt exactly the same way about her. "Lock Margrave Caldwell in the dungeon," Victor ordered, his voice carrying through the throne room. "Send riders to his estates and have them secured. Summon the other lords to an emergency council. This ends today." The guards moved to obey, dragging Caldwell away. The Margrave was shouting threats and curses, but Victor ignored him, turning instead to Zara. "Walk with me," he said quietly, and she nodded, setting down the staff and falling into step beside him. They left the throne room through the side door Zara had entered by, escaping the chaos and confusion, and made their way to the palace gardens. It was a cold day but clear, the sun bright overhead, and the gardens were empty of people, just bare trees and dormant flower beds waiting for spring. Victor led Zara to a bench beneath an old oak and sat, suddenly exhausted. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "That could have gone very badly," he said, "but it did not, because of you." "Because we worked together," Zara corrected, "because we trusted each other." Victor turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had walked into his life and changed everything. "I need to tell you something." "I know what you are going to say," Zara said softly. "Do you? You are going to say that you care for me, that these weeks of working together have meant more to you than just politics and strategy. You are going to say that you want more than friendship, more than alliance. You are going to say you love me." She smiled slightly. "Am I close?" "Remarkably so," Victor admitted. "But hearing it and hearing it said are different things. I love you, Zara Rockridge. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you refused that vow in the throne room, and I do not want to hide it anymore. I do not want to be careful or proper or distant. I want to court you openly, to make it known that you are precious to me, that I intend to make you my partner in every sense if you will have me." "Even knowing what that will cost?" Zara asked. "The scandal, the political upheaval, the anger from both our peoples." "Even knowing all of that," Victor said, "because you are worth it. Because what we could build together, the peace we could make, the example we could set, is worth any cost." Zara was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and sure, her hands coming up to cup his face. Victor kissed her back, his arms going around her waist, pulling her close. She tasted of cinnamon and cloves, and the feel of her against him was like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since you took my hand and gave me a choice. And yes, I will court you openly. I will stand beside you through whatever comes. I will be your partner, your ally, your love. My queen," Victor said quietly, "if you will accept it." Zara pulled back to stare at him. "You are proposing?" "Not yet. Not until we have finished what we started, brought down the corruption, made peace between our peoples. But when that is done, when we have built something worth having, I will ask you properly to marry me and rule at my side, and I hope you will say yes." "I will," Zara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "When you ask properly, I will say yes. But Victor, you do not have to wait for permission to call me yours. I already am." "And I am yours," Victor said, and kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. The emergency council convened the next day. Every major lord and lady in the kingdom summoned to hear the charges against Margrave Caldwell and the evidence of corruption in the border provinces. Victor stood before them with Zara at his side, no longer hiding their relationship or her importance to his plans. He laid out the case they had built together, document by damning document, witness testimony and ledger books and maps showing stolen lands. He detailed Caldwell's crimes, his murders and thefts and abuses, and he named the other lords who had been complicit, or had turned blind eyes to the suffering of the people they were meant to protect. The council erupted in shouting and denials and outrage, but Victor let the evidence speak for itself. It was thorough and damning and irrefutable, and when the dust settled, Margrave Caldwell was stripped of his titles and lands, sentenced to life imprisonment for treason and murder. 3 other lords were fined and placed under royal oversight, their authority in the border provinces transferred to administrators loyal to the crown. But the real work was just beginning. With Caldwell's network broken, Victor set about rebuilding the border administration from the ground up, appointing honest officials and establishing new trade agreements with the Orc clans. Zara served as his chief negotiator with her people, and she worked tirelessly to convince the clan leaders that this new king was different, that he could be trusted to keep his word. It took months of patient diplomacy and careful bridge building. Victor traveled to the border provinces himself, something no king had done in generations, and met with Orc and human leaders in their own territories. He listened to their grievances and their hopes, and he made promises that he intended to keep. Zara was with him every step of the way, translating not just language but culture, helping him understand the Orc perspective and helping her people see him as an ally rather than an enemy. They worked long days and fell into bed exhausted each night, but they did so together, and that made all the difference. Slowly, carefully, peace began to take root. The first formal treaty was signed in midsummer, a comprehensive agreement between the Crown and Clan Rockridge that granted fair grazing rights, protected hunting grounds, and equal representation in border councils. Other clans followed, each negotiating their own terms, each finding a place in the new order Victor was building. By autumn, the border provinces were transformed. Trade flourished without extortion. Orc and human settlements began to cooperate rather than fight. The raids stopped not because anyone was forced or starved into submission, but because there was no longer any need for them. And through it all, Victor and Zara's relationship deepened and grew. They made no secret of their love, dining together openly in the great hall, riding out together to visit settlements, standing side by side at every council and treaty signing. The court learned to accept it, and the people, seeing the peace that was blossoming under their partnership, began to accept it too. There was still prejudice, still resistance from those who could not imagine Orcs as anything but enemies. But Victor addressed it when he could and ignored it when he could not, trusting that time and example would do more to change hearts than any royal decree. On the first anniversary of the day, Zara had refused her forced vow. Victor took her back to the throne room where it had all begun. The room was empty this time, just the two of them and the afternoon light streaming through the high windows. He led her to the spot where she had burned the marriage contracts, where he had first taken her hand. "This is where it started," he said. "This is where I knew that you were the bravest person I had ever met, and that I would do anything to protect your right to choose your own path." "And you have," Zara said. "You have given me choices, Victor. You have given my people choices. You have changed everything." "We changed everything together," Victor said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, then knelt before her on the marble floor. "Zara Rockridge, I told you once that I would ask you properly to marry me when we had built something worth having. We have done that. We have made peace, brought justice, created a future where our peoples can live together without fear or hatred. Now I am asking you, here where it all began, to be my wife, my queen, my partner in all things. Will you marry me?" Zara stared down at him, her eyes bright with tears, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then she nodded, laughing through the tears, and pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she said. Yes, I will marry you, Victor Pemberton. I will be your wife and your queen and your partner. I will stand beside you for as long as we both live, and I will love you every day of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of silver set with a green stone the color of summer forests, and then he kissed her there in the empty throne room while the sunlight turned the world to gold around them. The wedding was planned for the spring, a full year and a half after the day they met. It would be the first union between orc and human royalty in the history of the kingdom, and Victor was determined to make it a celebration that honored both their cultures. The ceremony was held outdoors in the palace gardens, under the branches of the old oak where Victor had first told Zara he loved her. A human priest and an orc shaman conducted the rites together, blending traditions into something new and beautiful. Zara wore a gown of green silk embroidered with silver, her hair braided in the intricate orc style, but woven through with white flowers in the human tradition. Victor wore formal robes of state, but he had added an orc clan mark to his shoulders. Zara's family symbol worked in silver thread, claiming her people as his own. The garden was packed with guests, human nobles and orc clan leaders sitting side by side, united in witnessing this improbable union. Zara's father, Zara Rockridge, stood as her witness, a massive orc with iron-gray hair and a scar across his jaw, looking stern and proud. Victor's mother, the Dowager Queen, served as his witness, her eyes wet with tears as she watched her son pledge his life to this remarkable woman. When the time came for the vows, Victor spoke as clearly and without hesitation. "I take you, Zara Rockridge, as my wife and my queen. I vow to honor you, to trust you, to stand beside you in joy and in hardship. I vow to protect your people as my own, to build a kingdom where all can live in peace and dignity. I vow to love you with all that I am, for as long as I draw breath." Zara's voice was steady and strong as she answered. "I take you, Victor Pemberton, as my husband and my king. I vow to honor you, to challenge you, to stand beside you in all that we face. I vow to help you build a realm of justice and compassion, to bridge the divide between our peoples with love and understanding. I vow to cherish you with all that I am, for as long as life endures." The priest and shaman spoke the final blessings, and then Victor and Zara kissed to the sound of cheering from the assembled guests, orc war cries mingling with human applause in a joyful cacophony. The feast that followed lasted well into the night, tables groaning with food from both cultures, music and dancing and toasts in a dozen different languages. Victor and Zara moved through it all hand in hand, greeting guests and accepting congratulations, but they kept stealing glances at each other, sharing private smiles that spoke of the life they would build together. When the celebration finally wound down and the guests began to drift away, Victor led Zara to the royal chambers that were now theirs to share. He had had the rooms redecorated to reflect both their tastes, human tapestries hanging beside orc weavings, furniture scaled for comfort rather than ceremony. They stood together by the window looking out over the sleeping city, the capital peaceful and quiet beneath the stars. "Are you happy?" Victor asked softly, his arms around Zara's waist, her back against his chest. "More than I ever imagined I could be," Zara said. "Are you?" "Yes," Victor said simply. "Yes, I am. You ever think about that day in the throne room, about what would have happened if you had not taken my hand?" "Sometimes," Victor admitted, "but not with regret, only with gratitude that I made the choice I did, that you trusted me enough to stay and work with me. Everything good in my life now comes from that moment. Everything good in mine as well," Zara said. She turned in his arms to face him, her amber eyes soft in the candlelight. "I love you, King Victor. I love you, Queen Zara," he replied and kissed her tenderly. They made love that night with the windows open to the spring air, learning each other slowly and gently. Two people who had been allies and friends and partners becoming something even deeper. Afterward they lay tangled together in the sheets, talking in low voices about their hopes for the future, about the work still to be done and the life they would share. Zara fell asleep first, her head on Victor's shoulder, her breathing deep and even. He lay awake a while longer, watching her sleep and marveling at the path that had brought them here. A year and a half ago he had been a lonely king struggling to find his way, and she had been a prisoner about to be forced into a nightmare marriage. Now they were partners in every sense, bound by love and by shared purpose, building a kingdom that could be a beacon of hope for both their peoples. It would not be easy, Victor knew. There would be setbacks and challenges, resistance from those who clung to old hatreds, crises that would test their resolve. But they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. He pressed a kiss to Zara's forehead and let himself drift off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would meet it side by side. The years that followed were good ones. Victor and Zara ruled together, equal partners in governance, and under their leadership the kingdom flourished. The border provinces became the most prosperous region in the realm, a place where humans and orcs worked together in genuine cooperation. New towns sprang up, mixed settlements where children of both races played together in the streets and learned from each other's cultures. There were challenges, of course. Some of the old nobility never fully accepted the changes, and there were isolated incidents of violence from extremists on both sides. But Victor and Zara met each crisis with patience and justice, never wavering in their commitment to the peace they had built. 3 years into their marriage, Zara gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her mother's green skin and pointed ears but her father's dark eyes. They named her Victor Pemberton, and she was celebrated throughout the kingdom as a symbol of unity between the two peoples. 2 years later a son followed, Soren, who had his father's human features but his mother's strength and resilience. And then another daughter, Vera, who looked fully orc but had her father's quiet temperament and love of learning. Victor and Zara raised their children to honor both their heritages, to speak both human and orcish languages, to understand the customs and values of both cultures. The children grew up surrounded by love and acceptance, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to two worlds and were treasured by both. As the years passed and the peace held, Victor found himself reflecting often on that day in the throne room, the moment when he had made the choice that changed everything. He had acted on instinct and emotion rather than cold calculation, had followed his heart when every practical consideration argued for caution. It had been the best decision of his life. Zara felt the same way. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the palace was peaceful, they would sit together and talk about how far they had come, how much they had accomplished together. Sometimes they spoke of the challenges still ahead, the work that remained to fully heal the wounds of generations. But mostly they spoke of gratitude, of the love they shared and the family they had built, and the kingdom they had transformed into something better than either of them could have achieved alone. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Victor and Zara returned to the oak tree in the palace gardens where he had proposed, where they had been married. It had become a tradition over the years, a quiet moment just for the two of them away from the demands of crown and court. They sat together on the bench beneath the spreading branches, their children playing nearby under the watchful eyes of their guards. Kira was teaching Soren some complicated game involving sticks and pebbles, while little Vera chased butterflies through the flowers. 10 years, Zara said, leaning her head on Victor's shoulder. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Victor said. He laced his fingers through hers, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "Some days I still cannot quite believe this is my life, that I get to wake up beside you every morning and work beside you every day." "You are the one who made it possible," Zara said. "You are the one who took my hand when I had nothing and no one. You are the one who saw me as a person worth saving rather than a problem to be managed." "We saved each other," Victor said. "I was drowning in duty and loneliness before you came into my life. You showed me what it meant to be brave, to stand up for what was right even when it cost everything. You made me a better king and a better man. And you gave me a home," Zara said softly. "A place where I belonged, where I could be myself without fear or shame. You gave me love and partnership and children and a purpose beyond mere survival. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of the garden and the distant bustle of the city beyond the palace walls. The kingdom they had built together was not perfect, but it was good, and it was getting better with each passing year. Victor thought about the young king he had been a decade ago, uncertain and alone, trying to navigate a corrupt court and a divided realm. He thought about the orc woman who had walked into his throne room, expecting to be forced into a nightmare, and who instead found an ally and a partner and eventually a husband. They had come so far together, and they still had so much further to go. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Victor knew they would face them as they had faced everything else, side by side, hand in hand, united by love and by an unshakable commitment to each other, and to the peace they had worked so hard to build. "I love you," he said to Zara, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you too," Zara replied, and kissed him beneath the oak tree while their children played and the sunlight filtered down through the leaves in patterns of gold and green. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared and would continue to share in all the years to come. And as Victor held his wife close and listened to his children's laughter, he knew with absolute certainty that taking Zara's hand in that throne room had been the truest, bravest, best thing he had ever done. Their story had begun with a refusal and an unexpected choice, and it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a love that had transformed a kingdom and brought hope to two peoples who had known only conflict for generations. And they lived it together, every day, building their future one choice at a time, proving that courage and compassion could change the world when they were paired with genuine partnership and love. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of peace and prosperity. Victor and Zara's children grew strong and wise, educated in both human and orc traditions, and they became ambassadors in their own right for the unity their parents had worked so hard to establish. Kira, as the eldest, showed a natural talent for diplomacy and often accompanied her parents on state visits. Soren was a gifted strategist who helped reform the kingdom's defenses into a force meant for protection rather than aggression. Vera, the youngest, developed a deep love of scholarship and worked to preserve the histories of both peoples, so that future generations would never forget where they had come from. The mixed settlements that had started as experiments became thriving communities, models of what cooperation could achieve. Orc farmers shared techniques with human neighbors, improving crop yields for both. Human craftsmen learned from orc artisans, and the fusion of their styles created works of art that were prized throughout the realm and beyond. The borders that had once been bloody and contested became crossroads of culture and commerce, places where different peoples met not as enemies but as partners. Victor and Zara continued to govern together, their partnership deepening with each passing season. They developed a rhythm to their rule, playing to each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. Victor handled the intricate political maneuvering of the court with his quiet patience and careful thought, while Zara brought directness and moral clarity to decisions that could easily become tangled in precedent and protocol. They balanced each other perfectly, and their council meetings became known for their efficiency and fairness. Not everything was easy, of course. There were droughts that tested their ability to distribute resources fairly, and there were outbreaks of illness that required difficult decisions about quarantine and treatment. There were disputes between settlements that threatened to reignite old hostilities, and there were ambitious nobles who sought to undermine the new order for personal gain. But Victor and Zara faced each challenge as they always had, together, and with unwavering commitment to justice. They never let setbacks discourage them or successes make them complacent. They simply kept working, day after day, year after year, building the world they wanted their children to inherit. On their 20th anniversary, the kingdom held a grand celebration, not just of their marriage but of the 2 decades of peace that had followed. The festivities lasted a week, with people traveling from every corner of the realm to pay tribute to the king and queen who had changed everything. The climax of the celebration was a ceremony in the great square of the capital, where representatives from every major settlement, human and orc alike, came forward to renew their oaths of loyalty and cooperation. It was a moving display of unity, and as Victor and Zara stood together on the platform watching it unfold, they both had tears in their eyes. That night, back in their private chambers, they held each other close and spoke of the journey they had been on together. 20 years, Victor said, echoing Zara's words from a decade earlier. Sometimes it feels impossible that it has been so long. And yet here we are, Zara said. Still standing, still fighting for what we believe in, still loving each other as much as we did in the beginning. More, Victor corrected. I love you more now than I did then, because now I know all the ways you are extraordinary. I have watched you be brave and compassionate and brilliant for 20 years, and I fall in love with you anew every single day. You always know exactly what to say, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. Even after all this time, you can still make my heart race with just a few words. Good, Victor said, because I never want to stop trying to win your heart, even though I already have it. They made love that night with the same tenderness and passion they had shared on their wedding night, their bodies familiar and beloved to each other, and afterward they lay entwined and talked about the future they still had ahead of them. Our children will rule after us, Zara said. Kira has the wisdom for it, and Soren and Vera will support her. They will continue what we started. They will do more than continue it, Victor said. They will build on it, take it further than we could have imagined. That is what we want, is it not? For each generation to be better than the last. Yes, Zara agreed. That is exactly what we want. They talked late into the night about their hopes for their children and their kingdom, about the legacy they wanted to leave behind, about the work that still remained to be done. But mostly they simply enjoyed being together. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and who had built something extraordinary out of a single moment of courage and choice. As they finally drifted off to sleep, Victor thought once more about that day in the throne room, about the frightened orc woman who had refused to accept injustice, and the young king who had decided to stand with her. It had been a risk, a leap into the unknown, but it had led to everything good in his life. He would make the same choice 1,000 times over, he knew, and he would be grateful for it every single day. The decades continued to pass in peace and prosperity. Victor and Zara grew older together, their hair going gray, their movements becoming slower, but their love for each other never diminished. They eventually began to step back from the day-to-day governance of the kingdom, passing more and more responsibility to Kira and her siblings, preparing them to take on the full burden of rule. When Victor was in his mid-60s and Zara her early 60s, they officially retired from active governance, passing the crown to Kira in a ceremony that celebrated both tradition and innovation. Kira was crowned as the first monarch of fully mixed heritage, a living symbol of everything her parents had fought to achieve, and she took the throne with grace and strength, ready to lead the kingdom into its next chapter. Victor and Zara moved to a smaller residence on the palace grounds, a comfortable house with gardens where they could spend their days in peace. They still advised their daughter when she asked for it, and they still attended important state functions, but for the first time in their lives, they had time to simply be together without the weight of the kingdom on their shoulders. They spent their days walking in the gardens, reading to each other, receiving visits from their children and grandchildren. They traveled occasionally, visiting the places that had been important in their lives, the border provinces they had worked so hard to reform, the settlements that had flourished under their rule. Everywhere they went, they were greeted with love and respect, people thanking them for the peace and prosperity they had brought, for the example they had set, for the world they had helped create. On the 50th anniversary of the day they met, Victor and Zara sat together beneath the oak tree in the palace gardens one last time. They were old now, their bodies worn by years of hard work and service, but their hands still fit together perfectly, and their hearts still beat in sync. 50 years, Zara said, her voice soft with wonder. Half a century since you took my hand and changed everything. Best decision I ever made, Victor said. No question, no doubt, no regret. None at all, Zara asked, teasing gently. Not a single one, Victor confirmed. Every challenge we faced, every hardship we endured, it was worth it because we faced it together. I would not change a moment of it. Neither would I, Zara said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture as natural now as it had been when they were young. We built something good, did we not? Something that will last long after we are gone. We built something extraordinary, Victor said. We proved that love can bridge any divide, that courage and compassion can change the world. We gave our children and our people a better future. That is more than most can say. They sat in silence for a while, enjoying the peace of the garden and the comfort of each other's presence. Birds sang in the branches above them, and the spring flowers filled the air with perfume. It was a beautiful day, warm and bright, the kind of day that made you grateful simply to be alive. I love you, Zara Rockridge, Victor said finally. I have loved you since the moment you refused that vow, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Victor Pemberton, Zara said. You took my hand when I had nothing, and you gave me everything. You have been my partner, my love, my home. There is no one I would rather have spent these years with, no one I would rather stand beside when my time comes. Then we will face that together too, Victor said, as we have faced everything else. Together, Zara agreed, and they sat hand in hand beneath the oak tree, two souls intertwined, two lives lived in perfect partnership, two hearts that had found each other across the divide of species and prejudice and fear, and had built a love that transformed a kingdom. Their story was one of courage and choice, of refusing to accept injustice, and standing up for what was right even when the cost was high. It was a story of two people from different worlds who found common ground in their shared values and their mutual respect, who built a relationship on trust and honesty and genuine partnership. But most of all, it was a love story simple and profound, about a king who saw a woman in need and chose to help her, and about that woman who saw a man worth loving and chose to stay by his side. It was about the life they built together, the family they raised, the kingdom they transformed, and the legacy they left for future generations. And as the sun set over the palace gardens on that 50th anniversary, casting long shadows across the grass and painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Victor and Zara sat together in peaceful contentment, knowing that they had lived well and loved deeply, and made a difference that would echo through the ages. Their children found them there as the stars began to appear, still sitting hand in hand beneath the oak tree, and Kira smiled to see her parents so content, so perfectly matched even after all these years. "Mother, father," she said gently, "dinner is ready. Will you come inside?" "In a moment," Zara said, not taking her eyes from Victor's face. "We are just enjoying the evening." Kira nodded and withdrew, leaving them to their peace. She understood, as all their children did, that her parents' love was something sacred, something that deserved space and respect. Victor and Zara sat a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one, and they spoke quietly of small things, comfortable in the way that only people who have known each other for a lifetime can be. Eventually, they rose and walked back to their house together, moving slowly but steadily, supporting each other as they always had. They ate dinner with their family, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the house was full of laughter and warmth and love. That night, lying in bed together in the darkness, Victor felt Zara's hand find his beneath the covers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For taking my hand that day, for giving me a choice, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for staying," Victor whispered back, "for trusting me, for building this life with me, for being my partner in all things." "Always," Zara said. "Always," Victor agreed. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped together. Two people who had found each other across impossible odds and who had never let go, not through 50 years of challenges and triumphs, not through war and peace, not through youth and age. And when morning came, they woke together in the sunlight and began another day of the life they had built together. A life of love and purpose and partnership that would endure as an example and an inspiration long after they themselves had passed into legend. The years flowed on like a gentle river, and Victor and Zara remained together, their love a constant in a changing world. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren be born, each new generation a testament to the peace they had worked so hard to establish. The kingdom continued to thrive under Kira's rule, and the unity between humans and orcs became so deeply woven into the fabric of society that younger generations could hardly imagine a time when their peoples had been enemies. Victor and Zara's story became legend, told to children as an example of courage and love, studied by scholars as a turning point in the kingdom's history, celebrated by poets and bards in songs that would endure for centuries. But to Victor and Zara themselves, it was simply their life, the path they had walked together, the choices they had made, and the love they had shared. In their final years, when their bodies grew frail and their steps slow, they remained devoted to each other, caring for one another with the same tenderness they had shown since the beginning. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading and talking and simply being together, content in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved well. And when the end came, as it comes to all, they faced it together as they had faced everything else, hand in hand and heart to heart, two souls so thoroughly intertwined that even death could not truly separate them. Victor died first, peacefully in his sleep with Zara beside him, and she followed him just 3 days later, unable or unwilling to live without the man who had been her partner for more than half a century. They were buried together beneath the oak tree in the palace gardens, the place where their love had first been spoken aloud, and their grave became a site of pilgrimage for those who believed in the power of love to change the world. Their children grieved them deeply, but took comfort in the legacy they had left behind, a kingdom transformed by compassion and justice, a peace that would endure for generations, and a love story that would never be forgotten. And so the tale of King Victor Pemberton and Queen Zara Rockridge came to its end, but the world they had built together lived on, a testament to what two people could achieve when they chose courage over fear, love over hatred, and partnership over division. They had begun as strangers from different worlds, brought together by chance and crisis, and they had become partners, lovers, friends, and rulers who changed the course of history through the simple act of taking each other's hands and refusing to let go. It was a story of defiance and choice, of a woman who refused a forced vow and a king who offered her freedom instead. And it was a story that would be told and retold for as long as the kingdom stood, inspiring others to believe that love could conquer any obstacle and that courage could change the world. Victor and Zara's love had been the foundation upon which a new era was built, and though they themselves were gone, their legacy lived on in every mixed settlement, every cooperative venture between human and orc, every child who grew up knowing that the color of their skin or the shape of their ears did not determine their worth or their place in the world. They had taken a kingdom on the brink of collapse and corruption and transformed it into a beacon of hope and unity, and they had done it together. Two people who had found each other against all odds and who had built a love that would echo through the ages. And in the end, that was the greatest achievement of all, not the treaties they signed or the laws they passed or the reforms they enacted, but the simple, profound truth that they had loved each other deeply and truly, and had let that love guide them in all they did. It was a fitting end to a remarkable story, and as the years passed and became decades and then centuries, the legend of the orc bride who refused a forced vow and the human king who took her hand instead remained alive, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and love can light the way forward and change the world for the better. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure. And though they were gone from the world, they lived on in the hearts of all who remembered them and in the better world they had worked so hard to create. The kingdom they had saved and transformed continued to flourish, a living monument to the power of two people who chose love over hatred, courage over fear, and partnership over division, and who proved that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a single act of kindness, a single choice to extend a hand to someone in need, a single refusal to accept that things must always be as they have always been. Victor and Zara had been those revolutionaries, and their revolution had been one of the heart, transforming not just laws and policies but the very soul of their kingdom, showing that humans and orcs could not just coexist but thrive together, building something greater than either could achieve alone. And so their story ended where it began, in a court full of witnesses. But this time the witnesses were not there to see a forced marriage but to honor a love that had endured for over 50 years, a partnership that had transformed a kingdom, and two remarkable people who had shown the world what was possible when courage and compassion walked hand in hand. Their legacy would endure for generations. Their love would be remembered for centuries. And the world they built together would stand as proof that even the deepest divides can be bridged by those brave enough to try. And in that truth, in that legacy, in that enduring love, the story of Victor and Zara found its perfect ending, not with tears or regret, but with gratitude and joy and the certain knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and made a difference that would never be forgotten.